Good evening and welcome to the July meeting of the Committee of Adjustments. Before we begin, I'll ask Mr. Roth to read the territorial acknowledgement.
We have gathered in Wilmot Township on the traditional territory of the Neutral, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee and the Mississauga peoples. We also want to acknowledge the importance of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, which was a peace agreement made between the indigenous nations before the Europeans arrived. It characterizes our collective responsibility to each other and to Mother Earth. We should take only what we need, leave enough for others, and keep the dish clean. By acknowledging this covenant and the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, we are reminded of our important connection to this land where we live, learn, and work together as a community.
Thank you. I would like to start by introducing our committee. To my right, we have Mr. Miller, Ms. Kohler, and Mr. Roth. And with us this evening is Mr. Martin, our Manager of Planning and the Secretary-Treasurer of this committee. And my name is Tyler Bowman, and I'm the chair of this committee. We are an independent body appointed by Wilmot Township Council. We have the power to make minor changes to existing zoning regulations and to approve some changes to existing non-conforming uses and to give consent. Each applicant will be notified in writing within 10 days of the decision within 10 days. With the decision will be instructions on how it can be appealed. Any decision made by this committee can be appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal, who will then hold a meeting and make a final decision. Only the applicant and certain prescribed public agencies can appeal the committee's decision. If the decision on a minor variance is not appealed, it becomes final and binding after 20 days from the date of this meeting. If the decision on a consent is not appealed, it becomes final and binding after 20 days from the date the decision is mailed. The format of this evening's meeting will be as follows. I'll ask Mr. Martin to introduce the application. The applicant will then be invited to come forward and add any additional information if they choose. Following this, anyone in the audience will have the opportunity to speak for or against the application. The committee members will then follow with questions if they have any of the applicant, and the committee will then make a decision. So before we begin, I'd like to just ask, are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, I'll ask Mr. Martin to introduce our first application.
Thank you. Submission A1024 is made for property at 967265 Oxford Waterloo Road. The application proposes to increase the maximum allowable area of all accessory buildings on the property. It does not deal just specifically with the proposed building. It's the cumulative area of all structures on the property that are detached from the house. The proposal is to increase that percentage to about 116% from 75%, but relative to the property, the size of the home, it's a minor percentage of the entire lot's coverage. For instance, if the home were to be larger on this property, that size of structures would also be allowed to be larger. So it's all relative to the size of the home on the property. In this case, staff feel that there's no real issues not to support an increase. The recommendation includes a cap so that if the home were to be enlarged in the future, that percentage is relative to the existing home so that the size of accessory structures doesn't continue to increase as a variable of the home size. No objections or concerns were raised through circulation of the application, and staff recommend approval.
Thank you. Would the applicant like to speak on behalf of the application? Sure. Yep. So if you can just state your name and address for the record, and then feel free to add any comment.
My name is Kyle Cherry, and I live at 967265 Oxford Waterloo Road. And the application was just to build a 2,400 square foot shop. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the property, but it's about 1.5 acres. So I think it's a fairly reasonable size. I wanted to tuck it into the back as far as possible. That's why we went to 6 feet. But I mean, I don't have too much more to add. If you guys have any questions for me.
Yeah, why don't I turn it over to committee? I don't think there's anybody else to speak on the application, so any questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you for speaking to it. What I will do is, can I get a motion from the committee to approve this application? Thank you. Moved by Ms. Kohler, seconded by Mr. Roth. All in favor? And that is passed.
Thank you very
Carried.
much.
Thank you. And why don't we introduce the second application, please?
Thank you. Submission A1124 is made for property at 1191 Queen Street and 12 Main Street in Nunavut. Two separate buildings on the property with two addresses. The application applies to a proposed deck on the building at the corner. The current building is much closer to the property line than what current zoning standards would require, but it enjoys legal non-conforming status. The construction of an upper floor deck would replace a previous structure and doesn't introduce any new visual obstructions along the street. It's also designed such that the off-street parking space is maintained underneath the deck, and the recommendation includes conditions to ensure that remains an option in the future. So from a location perspective, staff certainly don't have any concerns, and the protection of that space for future current and future parking needs is also important, and as such is reflected in the recommendation. No concerns were raised, and staff recommend approval.
Thank you. Would the applicant like to speak? No? Is there there's, to my knowledge, no one wanting to speak for or against? No? So we'll turn it over to the committee. Any questions for our applicant? No? Can I get a motion from the committee to approve this application? Moved by Mr. Miller, seconded by Ms. Kohler. All in favor? And that motion is carried. We do have one last order of business, and that's the approval of the minutes from our last meeting in June. Could I get a motion to approve those minutes? Moved by Mr. Roth, seconded by Ms. Kohler. All in favor? Oh, you weren't here. That's passed. That's carried. Thank you. Is there any new business, or we can adjourn and figure out next meeting? Yeah? Okay. Well, thank you for attending this evening, and thank you for committee for participating in that, and we'll close that meeting. Thank you.